So, in 1991, after the success of Infinity, Rob Grant and Doug Naylor published a sequel to Infinity Welcomes Careful Drivers and called it Better Than Life after the TV show, it being the obvious choice of title as the denouement of the previous novel was the Better Than Life episode. I went into reading Better Than Life expecting it to be entirely set in the game. It isn't. It's only the first third of the novel, and then, like the first novel, the second one uses elements from the TV show, recycled episode ideas. However, by this point, series 3 and 4 had been broadcast, and so they had a further 2 seasons of story to draw upon. So if the first novel is season 1 and 2 in novel form, this is season 3 and 4 with, of course, Better Than Life. It takes plot elements from Better Than Life as well as the episodes White Hole, Polymorph and Backwards. Straight off the bat, I'll say I absolutely love this book. It is genuinely one of my favourite novels. Of the 4 novels, it's my favourite, in much the same way as The Restaurant at the End of the Universe, the second Hitchhiker's novel, is my favourite of that series. This is my favourite of the Red Dwarf novels, and also the second in the series. And like Hitchhikers, it essentially does what the first novel does, but here it just really works well. There's not a false note. Everything in this chimes. So not only is it my favourite Red Dwarf novel, it is arguably one of my favourite novels, full stop. Sue me. So the plot is, as I've said, the first third is still set in Better Than Life and the characters struggling to get out. They're in much the same situation as they were before. Rimmer's still the richest man on earth and married to a Brazilian bombshell actress.
Here was an opening. A look here could speak volumes. A casual shrug could articulate the whole state of his relationship. The tiniest, subtlest gesture could tell Juanita everything. He hurled himself to his knees.
I want you!
He sobbed.
I want you right here and now, urgently and completely. I don't care that you're insane. I still love you.
Lister still in Bedford Falls with Kachansky.
In the fictional town of Bedford Falls, it was Christmas Eve. But then again, in the fictional town of Bedford Falls, it was always Christmas Eve. Lister crossed the main street, his 2 sons perched on either shoulder, and headed for the toy shop. As they passed the jailhouse, Bert the cop was removing a wanted poster from the front window. There hadn't been a single crime in Bedford Falls for over 30 years.
Cat's still in his castle.
The cat slipped the gold fob watch out of his waistcoat, flicked open the cover, and stared at the dial. The cat had replaced the conventional numbers with a series of symbols. Right now, it was 6:20. Or to put it another way, 1/4 to food.
The only difference is that Crichton has now joined them in the game. He initially went in to rescue them, but ends up staying there because there's so much washing and ironing to be done.
The cafeteria was deserted, but in the kitchen, stacked ceiling high, were several huge towers of dirty dishes piled around a sink.
Oh, I'll just wash a few, he thought. Reduce the pile a bit.
8 months later, still washing, still surrounded by stacks of dirty dishes, he'd realised he'd been duped.
And like the TV episode that it's derived from, it basically follows the same structure, if not the events of that episode. All the characters start off happy in their most blissful existence, but because Rimmer has such a diseased mind, it eventually all goes wrong for him. His psyche rebels against him because he thinks deep down that he doesn't deserve anything good, so it all falls apart. Through a series of convoluted events, we read about him losing his fortune.
Mr. Rimmer? Arnold J.
Maybe.
I am a legally appointed representative of Solid Graham International. As you may know, your former company is in receivership, and I am hereby empowered to repossess your body.
He then ends up in prison, and I think it's his hard light body, or essentially what the novel's version of the hard light body is. This novel predates the hard light concept by several seasons. But his body is confiscated, and the only one he can get is that of a hooker called Trixie LaBouche.
They dashed down a corridor, Tonto and Jimmy effortlessly accelerating away, Rimmer couldn't keep up. For some reason, running was incredibly painful. But the pain wasn't in his legs, it was in his chest. Just what was this body he'd wound up in? A cardiac victim? A chronic smoker? Then he realized it was because he wasn't wearing a bra, and his large breasts were bouncing madly up and down in front of him.
Oh my God!
He screamed in a husky female voice.
I'm a woman!
So Rimmer ends up as a slutty woman in this story, and on the run with Charles Manson's crazier brother to all intents and purposes.
The gun fired. The guard fell.
Sorry, man,
He said to the dead guard.
I hate killing people. It's such a downer.
3 downers later, Tonto wheeled the double stretcher down the aisles of body racks, looking for Jimmy Jitterman's body.
He turns up in Bedford Falls and, of course, ruins everything for Lister just by turning up. He destroys the town.
The revelling carolers stood like a waxwork tableau as the giant tanker jackknifed into an uncontrollable skid and slammed through Mulligan's window, showering the street with teddy bears, dolls, and lethal shards of glass. Next, it took out the entire ground floor of Ma Bailey's boarding house before caroming through Ernie's gas station, uprooting the single pump and sending raw gasoline pulsing over the forecourt.
Kachansky thinks that Lister's been having an affair with Rimmer in the hooker's body, and so leaves him.
She was halfway across the street, scarlet-faced with the twins in tow.
Chrissy, wait!
And that's the point where they decide to go get the cat and leave the game. Of course, they turn up at the cat's home and ruins it all.
Where are the Valkyries?
They were sick and tired of bowing to your every whim and desire. They formed the Valkyrie Sex Slave Liberation Movement and left for the mainland.
What are we gonna do?
We're going to do what we should have done a long time ago. We're getting out of here. We're going back to reality.
The book then does the clever thing of the fake-out victory, which you can do with all good virtual reality stories. They wake up back on Red Dwarf, but Lister starts to notice that life aboard is a little too perfect. He has a cup of coffee in the morning and then another cup of coffee.
The second cup tasted even better than the first. And that was when Lister started to think. The second cup tasted better than the first? The second cup never tasted better than the first.
He then looks through his video collection. I love the fact that they still have videos in the Red Dwarf universe 200 years into the future. And he finds ones he's taped, but ones he actually wants to watch, which apparently never happens. And yeah, you're right, that does never happen. He then figures out that they're still in the game, and then the creator of the game appears and says,
Well done,
said a voice. They all turned to see a small figure materialize in the corner of the quarters.
My name is Dennis McBean.
The 3D recording continued.
I am the game's designer. You've negotiated the final obstacle in the most addictive computer game ever devised.
The figure blipped off, and the sleeping quarters slowly began to fade away.
And sends them back to reality, where, of course, they've been in the game for months and have to be nursed back to health by Crichton because their muscles are wasting away. The novel then goes into a version of the white hole story, although it's not a white hole in the book, it is just a standard black hole. I think the writers still hadn't had that idea. I believe this book actually predates the premiere of season 4, and so you get an early prototype version of that story in this. Where it differs from the events of the TV series is the imaginative idea of Lister having to go down onto a planet whilst the rest of the crew have to shoot through a black hole in Red Dwarf and come out the other side.
The cat's body started to spill off the couch in every direction. Long, thin strands of what had formerly been him slithered across the floor and intertwined with the strands that had been Crichton and Rimmer and the toaster. The anti-grav chamber became a sea of heaving, screaming, living linguini. Everyone became part of everyone else. They threaded together and formed a new whole. They weren't 4, they were 1.
The effect of doing this is that time goes at different speeds for all involved. So when they finally catch up with Lister on the planet, he's been there for 34 years and he's aged from 25 to 60.
The ship got stuck in a black hole. Time moves more slowly around a black hole. Relativity. From our point of view, you've only been away a couple of weeks.
I've been here on my own. waiting for you to bring me some food for the last 34 years. 34 smaggin' years.
And has had to spend the time on the planet as a farmer. The planet is full of crap. Where Lister lives, it's all empty glass bottles. It transpires that the planet he's actually on is Earth.
Looming on the horizon were the colossal silhouettes of 5 faces, or rather 5 half-faces, which thrust out of the sea of garbage as if they were seeking one last breath before they were claimed by the refuse. Lister knew them. He recognized them all. George Washington, Thomas Jefferson, Abraham Lincoln, Theodore Roosevelt, and perhaps the greatest American president of all time, Elaine Salinger. He knew where he was now. Mount Rushmore, South Dakota. This hellhole of a planet, this uninhabitable pit of filth, was Earth.
It was basically decided that it would become the major dumping ground for the rest of the planets. By this point, the entire human race is living on all the other planets and moons in the solar system. And because Earth is now by far the most polluted, it becomes a large rubbish refuse. And through a series of convoluted events, the gases in the atmosphere have caused an eruption that's ripped it out of orbit of the sun and sent it shooting across the galaxy.
The methane storm whipped up to hurricane force and sucked the ship to the ground. A continent of methane exploded. The blast triggered off a thermonuclear reaction in 1,000 discarded atomic power stations, and the Earth tore itself from its orbit around the Sun and blew its way out of the solar system.
Which is where the crew encountered it could happen. The reason it's stopped now is because we have the playing pool with planets sequence which sends it into orbit around another sun.
She rides! Lister wiggled his hips and arms in a touch-up shuffle. She rides! You jammy bastard.
How can that be jammy? I pocketed all 3 planets with one stroke. How can that be a fluke?
Rimmer and Lister end up stranded on the planet, and much of the dialogue from Marooned is recycled here, but with some greater depth because you can read what Rimmer is thinking in the moment. So when he relays the losing his virginity story to Lister, it's firmly stated that it was a lie, because as everyone knows, the only person Rimmer's ever slept with is Yvonne Magruder.
The very first time was this girl I met at cadet college, Sandra. We were both 19. We did it in the back of my brother's car. What was it like? Oh, fantastic, brilliant. Bentley convertible, V8 turbo, walnut burr paddling. Beautiful machine, beautiful. So what about you? How did you lose yours?
As the signal from Red Dwarf that's projecting him gets weaker, he eventually breaks apart and rematerialises on Red Dwarf. And then Lister hatches an idea for Red Dwarf to tow the Earth back to its original solar system. This never comes to fruition because whilst they're on the Earth, a polymorph makes it onto Starborg and stows away back onto Red Dwarf. And then we basically have the events of polymorph play out. I should mention that Holly, who's still a man in the novel series, has also done the IQ compression thing from White Hole, which means he's shut himself off. And Talkie Toaster is basically taken the place of Holly when it comes to dealing out all the exposition.
The event horizon is the point of no return. So,
He paused.
who's for a hot cross bun?
Rimmer strode across to the toaster. Holly told you this, didn't he? After he got his IQ back. The toaster's grill glowed red.
Maybe.
Did he happen to mention how to get out of one?
That depends on whether or not anyone wants any toast.
So the events of Polymorph play out pretty much exactly as they do in the TV show, with 1 or 2 minor differences, which are actually improvements. Gone is the Lister willingly having sex with Rimmer's mum scene.
Rimmer lay writhing on the floor as the polymorph wriggled through his databank, searching through his personality disk, trying to stimulate a new emotion to sample. Images jolted into Rimmer's brain, memories half forgotten. He's got an exam in the morning. He's 30 years old and he's got an exam in the morning. All his life he's always seemed to have an exam in the morning, and those
bastards in room 1115 having a smegging party, and how many times does he have to tell them he has an exam in the morning? And every time he tells them, what do? They turn the music up. And another letter. Overlooked for promotion. For the 6th year on the run. Overlooked for promotion. Have to wait yet another year, and it's just not fair. It makes you so furious. The countless frustrations of a lifetime welled up inside him until he felt he would burst. Then he did. And 53 decks above, in the hologram simulation suite, the polymorph devoured his anger.
The only difference is that it ends with the death of Lister at the hands of the polymorph before they finally manage to bring it down.
Lister? Rimmer crouched over Lister's immobile form. Lister? Crichton hurried over and knelt by his side. He looked down at Lister's grey face. Crichton reached forward, and his open palm closed Lister's eyes.
But it's not quite the end, because the novel ends with them shooting his body Spock-style through the Omniverse, and Lister waking up on what appears to be Earth, with somebody giving him his wallet. He wakes up, he gets in a cab, he notices a newspaper where all the text is printed backwards, and the cab takes him home, and there waiting for him is Christine Kochanski. Transpires that he's now living on Earth, but an Earth where time is running backwards, and he's destined to live out the next 34 years in a backwards reality with Kochanski until he will rendezvous with the crew who will pick him up when he reaches the age of 25 again.
At the end of the lawn, an old woman in a wide-brimmed sun hat was clipping away at the jasmine borders. She looked up and saw him, and her face crinkled into a famous pinball smile. 36 years. They would grow young together. They had a whole new past to look forward to. The old man's face crinkled into a smile of its own, and he started shuffling down the garden towards her.
So that's Better Than Life, the novel. As I said before, this is a great book. It really perfects what the first book was trying to do. It's a zippy little read, but it's replete with really imaginative ideas, really funny moments. Just the abundance of imaginative ideas that's in this novel. Even if you'd never seen the TV series, you'd be overwhelmed by some of the ideas that they recycle from the TV series. But even if you are really familiar with it, there's still spades of imaginative ideas that they didn't use in the TV show. Having Earth turning up and it being a large refuse ground for all of Earth's crap, and the Eurovision Song Contest style that was the progenitor for having Earth turned into such a place.
Here are the votes of the Mercurian jury. Pluto, 2 points. Pluto, 2 points. La Pluton, 2 points.
It's a great book, and it's a really, really great read. So those are the Grant Naylor Red Dwarf novels. In the next video, I'm going to be looking at the Grant Naylor solo effort novels. This is where the writing team of Rob Grant and Doug Naylor have split, much like they did when it came to writing the TV series. Of course, Doug Naylor famously or infamously carried on writing the TV series solo. Rob Grant went on to pastures new, but they were contractually obliged to produce 2 more novels, and I'll be looking at those in the next video, so join me then.